Good morning, everyone, and welcome to MZ Webinars. Thank you for joining us this morning. We have a great topic today, all about the new skills advisory panels and how we match skills demand and supply. We have Will Cookson, our he's the Director of Economic Development. He's joining us this morning and he's doing the presentation. During the course of the presentation, if you have any questions, please can you put them in the question box on the control panel and we'll try and get back to you with the answers at the end of the presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Will. Good morning, Will.
Thanks, Debbie. Good morning to you and good morning to everyone that has tuned in, logged in, or whatever it is that you do to connect on webinars. I've got quite a bit to get through today, so we'll go at some pace. Just to say that all the slides will be shared afterwards, along with a link to a recording of the presentation. But that doesn't mean that you should leave. Stay with us because it's exciting stuff. So this is the second of the webinars that we're doing focusing on the skills advisory panels. Previous one essentially looked at the Department for Education toolkit, looked at the proposed data sources, and we started to challenge that and look at what gaps were there and what other data could be brought into the mix. So that's already up on our YouTube channel if you missed that. Today the focus is slightly different. So as Debbie said, this is how to match skills supply and demand. So I'm going to take you through to our agenda. We'll do a brief introduction of MZ for those that don't know us. We'll do a brief piece on the roles of skills advisory panels, which I may well use the abbreviation of SAPs, so excuse that. We'll look at why it's important to match skills supply and demand, the challenge around that. We'll look at the steps needed in order to basically there's a process that you can follow in order to match skills supply and demand. We'll take you through that. I'm not sure why there's a case study in there. There is no case study. There are some examples, and we will get to a summary as well. Ignore the case study on Basingstoke College of Technology. That one slips through. So I will move on, and I'll tell you a bit about MZ. So essentially, most important thing for you to know is our mission is to help people make better decisions relating to the world of work. And we do that through providing robust, detailed and localized labour market information. We have a data set which is used within our tools. What we're talking about today will predominantly be focused on the data that's set in our analyst tool. I should also say that we've got 120 plus UK customers, and our UK base is in Basingstoke, but our head office is in Moscow, in Idaho, in the United States. In the UK, we work within the economic development space with LEPs, mayoral combined authorities, local authorities. We also work with education providers and FE, HE and awarding bodies like City and Guilds. And we also work with employment services, whether that's like the welfare to work providers or also recruitment and staffing companies. So just a brief piece on MZ data. We have jobs data from 2000, data set essentially, it goes back to 2003. We go down to 4-digit SIC, which is standard industry classifications, and standard occupational classifications, or SOC. And we do that for every city, district in Great Britain, so essentially every local authority area. Each economy is described in terms of industries and occupations and the number of jobs held by each. We'll go into more detail on that as we get into the presentation. The other thing I wanted to point out, and we will also come across this, is that we also use job posting analytics. Essentially, this is qualitative data that we draw from employers' recruitment activity and the skills and requirements that they are recruiting to. And that data is updated in real time, whereas our main data sets are updated annually. And we also make labour market projections, which go out currently to 2027, and then with each year we move that out a year, and that's based on looking back over 3, 5 and 8 year time trends. So we look at what's happened within the economy, and we then project that forward. We won't really talk about it today, but it is relevant if you're working in a local enterprise partnership or a local authority or an economic development function, is we have strength finder reporting. This is a great way to understand industry strengths, opportunities and risks within your local economy, and it brings in other metrics like GVA, job growth and location quotient. We won't go on, we won't focus too much on that today. If you do want to find out more, either drop me a line or there are webinars where we've covered that in some detail previously. So skills advisory panels, you may well be aware, I imagine if you've joined us today, essentially skills advisory panels have been around for a while, but had a real push with government announcements last year. There's been some additional funding identified for skills advisory panels, and there's also the DfE have created a toolkit to help skills advisory panels with developing data sets. It's very much a work in progress. So what are they for? Essentially, skills advisory panels will help mayoral combined authorities, Greater London Authority, LEPs, to understand their current and future skills needs and challenges within their labour market. There'll be partnerships, local partnerships, bringing in public, private sector employers, local authorities, colleges and universities. So trying to get everyone around the table through representatives. Why is it important? It's important because big decisions are being made regarding large amounts of public money, how large amounts of public money are being spent. And to do that effectively, it's really important that we understand current and future skills needs in order to ensure that that money is being used effectively, and to ensure that we're doing our best to help residents, employers and communities. So why do we need to look at skill supply with local demand? What does it mean? Why is it important from a provider point of view, from a HE and FE point of view? We may focus a bit more on FE today, but that doesn't mean that HE isn't just as relevant. Providers essentially need to be able to evidence that their curriculum is well aligned to local employment demand. That's an Ofsted requirement, but that's also a big requirement within the HE sector as well. But it's not just an Ofsted requirement, it's also a social obligation to students, local employers, taxpayers and local communities to ensure that people are best skilled to take advantage of local employment opportunities, and that employers can draw upon a workforce that has the skills that they need. So how can we align local provision to local employer demand? The approach we take to matching local skills supply and demand essentially there's 5 steps to it. First, we'll look at reviewing existing provision in a given area. Second will be to understand the actual demand. So the first step is around supply. The second step is around demand. Third will be to identify gaps in provision. Fourth is how you act on those findings, how you use those findings to challenge existing provision. And the fifth is how you really influence the provider base to improve their match. So step 1, reviewing provision. How do we do this? It's really important when we're looking at this that we understand. We need to identify the key metric, I suppose, is when we look at occupations data, is that we really need to understand annual openings. Annual openings will include new and replacement demand. So this is not just new job growth, this is also accounts for the churn within the labour market. And that's the key piece of data really that we need to look at in regards to related occupations in your area. When we're looking at occupations data, we will go down to a 4-digit SOC level, standard occupation classification, and the reason we'll go to that is that's a very granular level. So rather than a generic buildings trade, you will get down to how many bricklayers. So it becomes far more specific. Secondly, we take the number of students who've completed qualifications in each subject area across the provider base. We'll also look at how they went, who went into employment. Now, this is based on ILR data, and this will be based on the colleges or universities that you have around the table agreeing to share that data with yourself if you are the local enterprise partnership or other stakeholders at the table. We're not looking at personalized data there. This is aggregated data, and essentially what we want to know is we want to know what their key learning aim is and what it has been in the previous year and what's been completed. So this is looking at historic data to get an idea of what's being delivered. Thirdly, through comparing these metrics, we can map how well the provider's courses are currently aligned with the occupations to which they relate. So, yeah, simple diagram. It's time for that. I've done a lot of talking, as you can see. The challenge here is to get that balance between supply and demand. If either one is weighted down, then we've got a misalignment and a skills gap. Here's an example. So essentially what we're looking at here is we're looking at the annual openings and course completions in 5 subject areas. And you'll see that obviously in the top 3 there, we've got more demand than we have supply. Obviously with art, design and fashion, only very slightly. So you've got quite a good match there in terms of art, design and fashion. And then in terms of the hospitality course completions and the beauty therapy in hospitality, we've got far more annual openings than we have got course completions. So we've got a mismatch there where we've got a much higher demand potentially for people with those skills than we have got in terms of the skills supply. And finally, at the bottom, we've got beauty therapy, hairdressing, where we've got a higher amount of course completions and slightly less annual openings. So there's probably a need to slightly rebalance there. There are other factors that we'd consider as well, or we would also consider. Essentially, there's the existing workforce. So vacancies can be filled from within the existing workforce or from workers moving into your area from other localities. Job claimants, every region will have job claimants who are seeking jobs in these occupations, and we do take those into account through the data set that we have within our analyst tool. Now, other providers may well also be supplying skills in the area. There's a challenge here, which is to try and get as much a complete a picture as you can. We work a lot with individual colleges, and they will tend to only be able to see their own provision. And this is why skills advisory panels are really important, because essentially if we can get all of the colleges, all the universities around the table and get some insight in terms of independent training providers, then you're going to get a much fuller picture. But there will always be education providers who are supplying skills in your area, and there'll need to be some qualitative research around that. Nevertheless, even before we take in these 3 factors into account, the data will give a clear view in terms of a directional sense of where things are going, what's been and where you currently sit in terms of supply and demand. So 2 crucial questions. What are the occupations and skills needs in your area, it should be, and what education levels make up those occupations? So this is really about step 2, understanding local skills demand. Essentially what we're looking at here is we're looking at skills demand, and what we've done is we've run a report looking at occupations using our analyst tool, and what we've got here is we've got the top 10 occupations by projected annual openings over the next 5 years in the coast to capital LEP region. So there you will see 2018 jobs, and then you'll see annual openings that are anticipated over the next 5 years. And then those have been ranked in order, as this is the top 10. So as you can see, sales and retail is at the top. And then you've got care workers, probably not a huge surprise, and it goes down to secondary education teaching professionals. To really understand this further, we've got to also look at the education levels. So what we're doing here now is we've able to identify the occupations, but also the annual openings data that we looked at previously, which I said is a key metric, but then we're also looking at the education level. So this starts to give you an idea of the level of skills more broadly that are required for each of those occupations. We can then go on to further explore skills demand. So we've got a different example here. Here we're looking at the top 10 occupations relating to engineering course area in the Leeds region in 2017. So we're looking at, we've got the top here, we've got some key metrics. We've got the number of jobs that relate to these occupations in, those would be annual total jobs in 2017 for the Leeds area. We've got the projected job growth, 4% growth, and we've got some data around the median hourly wages, which we can find for any of the occupations that we're talking about today. The key metrics that we've got here when we start to look, and what's interesting about this is you start to see how engineering provision can relate to a broad range of occupations, from IT engineers through to mechanical engineers and everything in between, including civil engineers. We've got key metrics here. We've got the total jobs for each of those occupation sets, and we've also got the annual openings and the percentage growth. So you can start to see whether the course provision is meeting the demand of those broad range of occupations within that course area. We can look at a broader context as well. So we can start to compare growth rates to find out if this is something that is particularly important for your area. So here we've got a comparison where we're looking at Leeds, neighbouring areas, Sheffield, Bradford, Kingston upon Hull, or Hull as it's better known, and then you've got the government office region of Yorkshire and Humber, and then you've got the national as well. And you can see from here that there's significant growth over this time period. We're looking from 2017 forwards to 2022. So this is using our projections data to understand what growth there is in comparison with other areas. Is this an area in which you've got a comparative advantage and therefore need to ensure that you continue to make this to meet those skills needs? Here we're looking at a slightly different data set, again drawn from our analyst tool, and we're looking at job posting analytics. I mentioned this right at the start of the webinar. Essentially, it's useful for understanding what's happening on the ground in terms of recruitment activity. It's not the be-all and end-all, and it definitely needs to be looked at within the context of quantitative data sets around occupations and industries, but it does provide interesting insight. Here we've got the top 10 companies in Leeds at this point in time looking to recruit engineering occupations. Job titles, really important as well. And then probably most critically and interesting for what we're discussing today, the top 10 hard skills. So these are skills that are being referenced by employers within their job adverts. These have been mapped to ONET as well. So identifying gaps in provision, step 3. Why the need for a gap analysis? Well, essentially the supply-driven approach that we identified in step 1 provides a good starting point for alignment of skills provision because it allows you to understand your current provision. But as that supply-driven, i.e. it starts with provision, it can't help us to understand the demand for skills. And that starts with labour market demand. what's required in the local economy. To achieve this, you need to begin with your local labour market as a whole, measure the current provision offer against the holistic demand, and then identify the gaps, hence a gap analysis. So what does a gap analysis do? Essentially, as you'll see with these three bubbles, you've got the skills provision on one side, you've got the local labour market inside on the other, you've got the number of completers, and where there is a mismatch, you will identify the gaps. So beginning with the labour market and measuring provision, it means you can identify which courses are currently oversupplying, which areas of high labour market demand are currently not being met, and where there may be areas of opportunity to develop new skills provision to meet those gaps, those needs. So an example, the green courses that we've got up, the green areas that we've got up here, they're areas where the provider base already offers courses. So, you know, that provision, that those skills needs are being met. There may be room, as you can see in the data here, to further grow to meet that demand, but it's, you know, it's not in danger of not being met. It's just a bit more that could be done. The blue courses, the provider base does not currently offer. So there's potential for creating new courses to meet those skills needs. So a big gap identified there. And yellow is areas where data suggests the provider base is currently oversupplying the labour market. So there probably needs to be a rebalance there, or at least a discussion with the provider to understand why they have so many completers when the annual openings are just not there to support that. So an informed discussion, and then potentially some challenge and influence. Right, step 4, act on the findings. We found through working with education providers that often gap analysis will be completed, but the results of the report can potentially be left sitting on a shelf. One of the reasons for this is not knowing where to start to follow through on the findings, almost getting submerged in the data and not seeing a clear way through as to what can be actioned. And the key, where possible, is to concentrate on the most significant areas of misalignment and gaps. And I think this plays completely to the work of the skills advisory panels. You've got everyone around the table, their time is precious. How do you prioritize where you want to take action? I'd suggest focusing on those significant areas of misalignment and gaps will be a great place to start. Here we've got an example of the type of reporting that can be drawn through our analyst tool. So this gives you an overview of curriculum, and this is through the example here. It's got ILR data in it, and I think the key thing here is to look. If you see, you can see that it's split out quite simply in terms of strengths, opportunities, and threats. Threats being where there's either where there's essentially oversupply, opportunities where there's an opportunity to better meet that skills gap, and strengths where there's a good match and a good case to demonstrate that the provider base is meeting the demand. So step 5, influencing the provider base to improve match. As I see it, this is absolutely key to the skills advisory panel work, but it's important to recognise as well that providers will have it in mind that it's part and increasingly part of the requirements that they're due to deliver against in regards to Ofsted inspections or HEFCE, but which also help. This is how you essentially, I think, meet the SAP's mission to ensure that learners are best placed to get employment using the skills that they've gleaned, that employers are being supplied with the skills that they need, and in the broader sense, supporting growth in the local and wider economy as well. If your employer base is growing, they're going to be an increasing need for a skilled workforce. So I think it's a great opportunity to ensure that SAP are delivering on their remit to respond to current and future skills needs, and meet those labour market challenges, going back to our definition of the SAP role that we identified at the start of the webinar. So in summary, and I agree it's been a whistle-stop tour, but it's always worth summarising at the end. Best place to start is with a provision review. The important thing there is that you're bringing your FE and HE partners and their data sets to that as well. That will allow you to establish where current skills provision is well aligned and where it is misaligned. The provision review only takes you so far as it's supply led, and although it can result in better aligned course, it can't produce a truly demand led offer. For that, you need to have good insight on your local labour market. And the thing that I always say at this point is local is absolutely critical to this, because even from local authority to local authority, the labour market and the skills demand will vary. So beginning with the labour market, you can undertake a gap analysis. This identifies not only areas of misalignment, but also areas where skills needs have not been met at all. And then the best way to implement those changes is to prioritise interventions based on the biggest misalignments and gaps. Improving the skills match, obviously, as we've said, really I think will drive the role of SAPS forward and ensure it's delivering on its remit to respond to current and future skills needs and labour market challenges. So if you'd like to find out more, the opportunity is there for us to talk. Happy to have a quick call, book in a meeting, and always difficult to demonstrate tools without actually showing you the tool itself. So yes, if you'd like to find out more about our analyst tool and how it can help with the skills advisory panel work, do drop me a line. Happy to pick up a conversation. Before we go on, I should just check whether we have had any questions.
Yes, we have. The first question is, in the annual openings versus course completion example, just quite a way back in the slides, are you also including relevant HE completions?
Good question. In terms of the completions data that I've used in terms of the examples, those were FE examples. Absolutely, HE provision can be used. I think the challenge here is back to the skills advisory panels to ensure that those stakeholders are on the panel or representatives are there for FE and HE. And the key thing is ensuring that the data is shared by those institutions. And like I said, this isn't personal data. This is high level data in terms of completions by course area. Or by qualification. Yeah, there's more information on this. If that didn't quite answer it, do drop me a line. Happy to respond in more detail in terms of what you would need to request.
Okay, next question. To date, you've focused on training funded by public sector. Is there a means of understanding what employers are paying for directly?
Really good question, and not an easy one to get to the bottom of. Essentially, that is dependent on conversations with your employer base. So it tends to be qualitative. There aren't quantitative returns made by employers in terms of private provision that they may be purchasing. There are ways in which you can, and I have seen that information has been drawn out through surveys, but it's always a little bit hit and miss. But yeah, good question. To answer it really straightforwardly, I would say that there may be some qualitative understanding, but there's not quantitative hard data in terms of what employers are purchasing privately.
Okay, that's good. Okay, last question. Is there a way to get beyond occupations to understanding what skills are increasingly likely to be the causes of skills gaps and skills shortages? Did you get that?
No. Go on, try again, and I'll have a second attempt. Yeah.
So is there a way to get beyond the occupations to understanding what skills are increasingly likely to be the causes of skills gaps and skills shortages?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, I understand. Sorry, I think what the question is asking, is there a way of identifying the skills aside from occupations, and understanding whether those skills gaps need to be addressed or how they could be addressed. I think the job posting analytics data is really useful. Often in fast emerging sectors like digital sector, the occupations data tends to lag in terms of how we define occupations. So what we'll tend to do is we'll look at recruitment activity, look at which skills are required. In terms of hard skills, are there particular qualifications or experience that is required? And then you can start to identify where those gaps are being met. I would say that the occupations data in terms of is really important for understanding in a very quantitative way the actual volume of demand. I think when we're talking more broadly about skills gap, the job posting analytics can provide some really interesting context.
Okay. Another question?
Sure.
Well, how do we take into account those that go into self-employment? So, for example, sports, fitness, they show low employment in the example, but many of these could go on to be self-employed personal trainers.
Yeah, and really good question, and one being completely transparent about. There is a grey area there as well, partly because you have to get to a certain point in regards to being self-employed. You have to get to a certain threshold really to become apparent within the data. We do have detail on micro businesses. We do have data in terms of self-employed people, but I wouldn't say that it's the full picture. I would say, however, that you can still, if the annual openings are as stark as they were in that example that we had there in regards to sports and recreation, even, I would assume that there's still a mismatch. I think you could probably say that there's still a mismatch by looking at the number of courses that have been provided. But that's where I was saying it's important to have that conversation with the stakeholders, the providers that are also on the panels, to understand their take on that, because they will have information in regards to destinations data for learners that they could bring to that.
Okay, and our last question.
Sure.
Can a report take into consideration predictions around future jobs, technology skills for our economy?
Yes, it can in terms of future jobs through the projections that we can make. In terms of the second part of that question, we'd need to do that really by industry or occupation. The only other way in fast moving sectors, like I said, you can look at the recruitment activity that employers are, what they're advertising for in terms of skills needs. So yes, you can look at that projection you can make a projection going forward to understand year on year potential growth in regards to by an occupation, essentially.
Great. Well, thanks for all those questions. That was really good.
Really appreciate it. I think that's more questions than I've had on any previous webinar. So thank you for that. I just also wanted to say our annual conference is on the 16th of May. Really, to be honest, the theme that we've got around defining, developing, and delivering for the skills of the future completely fits with the webinar that we've gone through today. So if you're interested in attending or finding out more, looking at the agenda and the workshop, do go onto the MZ UK website or Google it. But yes, it should be a really good event and worthwhile.
It's going to be great, because we're going to be putting all the thought leaders together from the different sectors, the education, economic development and talent spheres, and they're all going to discuss all these questions. So yeah, it's really applicable to what we've been talking about today. So yeah, thank you for that, Will.
Thank you. So thank you for everyone that attended. And like I said, there'll be a recording of this, and we'll share the slides as well. But yeah, if you want to pick up a conversation, do make contact. My contact details are here. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.